Hello, hopefully everyone's doing really well today, wherever you're at, whenever you're at, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. And I want to talk about interest rates today because there's been a lot of discussion about interest rates. Whether you are a Donald Trump fan or whether you are not a Donald Trump fan, we know that interest rates are something that really kind of stir the pot and increase temperatures. Now, it's no secret that Donald Trump has been extremely critical, even going so far as to calling for the firing of the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, who over the last few years has really kept the interest rates slightly higher or at least stable from where they had been prior to 2020. Okay, so interest rates, as you know, by definition, is the cost of money and what that money will cost for you to go and borrow it. Of course, interest rates have been extremely high, as in the early 1980s, we saw interest rates in the double digits, in the high teens. And we know around 2020, 2019, interest rates even got under 4% for a 30-year mortgage. Now, the problem with high interest rates, of course, that people like to uh, point out would really be that, of course, you're going to have a higher monthly payment for whatever you want to borrow on, whether it is car, auto loans, student loan rates, and of course, the probably the biggest elephant in the room, which would be homes, the price of your home per month, or what is your monthly payment. Now, certainly, if you think about how much money people put in a down payment, whether it's 5, 10, 15, or 20%, um, whatever you put in down payment, that remaining balance is calculated in to your monthly payment. Of course, we all know this. Now, this sounds like it would be good then if you were to have lower interest rates. And yes, in a way, but it does come with a caveat. And what I'd like to do today here is to explain why I disagree with Donald Trump in terms of his constant, constant um, advocating for a lower interest rate. Inflation is a huge issue, and one of the things that fights inflation is, of course, a higher interest rate. And if you look at it by definition, interest rate is the cost of money. So, the more of a higher interest rate that we have, that means money costs more, which inherently really puts more value into that currency, saying, well, it's worth more and we're going to charge you more. And we know that with higher interest rates, people tend to spend a little bit less. And again, it's a double edged sword because economics is not perfect. You would think, well, if people are spending less money, that means people are buying less products because it costs more to borrow. So if people are buying less, then suddenly the economy stabilizes. And then, of course, perhaps what happens is down the road, and again, you can get into the slippery slope argument, that perhaps layoffs happen because companies aren't just bringing in the revenue. But you also have to think of the flip side of that. You could bring in $1 million, or you could bring in $900,000, but if the $1 million has less purchasing power than the $900,000 that you brought in the previous year, which year did you actually do better at? And again, this is one of those questions that again has really um, bewildered economists, and there's different schools of thought on there. And then, of course, you have the Ron Paul guys who say, well, we should end the Federal Reserve. Why do we have one person, one entity choosing the interest rates for the entire economy? Isn't that a little bit absurd? And there's a very, very solid argument for that as well. So the problem with lowering interest rates is that it encourages people to borrow perhaps more than what they can comfortably borrow. Again, this is a country that we're 30 trillion in debt. The country is built on debt. And yes, I understand what Donald Trump is trying to do. He's trying to lower the interest rate so that we can pay down on debt with some of the money that we're generating from tariffs. And if the interest on the United States debt is lower, theoretically, we should be able to pay down the national debt faster. I get that. And he also wants to spur the economy, to create more jobs, of course, to put people in homes. And I do want to talk quite a bit about homes here, but I'm going to push this back a little bit too. But the problem is that we're never going to solve the U.S. national debt through trying to, lower interest rates and play around with what that interest rate is. We're never going to do it because the national debt is too high. And again, this is probably a different story for a different time. But if we're ever going to really look at the national debt, we need to look at social entitlement programs. We need to look at the largest expenditures of the United States. And again, when you see, we reduce US expenditures, they're talking about the rate. They're not talking about the amount of money we spend. They're talking about the rate of increase. So it's like, well, we decreased our spending by 10%. Well, you haven't decreased spending by 10%. What you've done is you decreased the rate of increase by 10%. So no, we're definitely not saving money. The national debt is growing. We're just kicking that can down the street. And I know it's kind of fashionable for millennials, or certainly Gen Z, to go and critique baby boomers. And if one of my biggest complaints of the baby boomer generation, and I'm an old millennial, would be that the baby boomers have really just continued to disregard the national debt crisis. So, is lowering the interest rate the best way to solve the national debt crisis? Of course not. Um, and I think that could be what Donald Trump may be thinking about when he constantly harks on this idea that we must lower interest rates. So, where's the problem? Well, again, Americans spend too much. I think the average consumer debt was $7,000, $8,000 in credit cards. I think the average cost of a vehicle or car loan was about 700 a month. The average mortgage rate, or I'm sorry, the average mortgage is 15, 16, 1700, something like that, I believe, in this country. So the fact is that we spend way too much money. We are a nation of borrowers, and certainly there is a good time to borrow money. I think a home is a good thing for that. I think that within a certain amount of reason, student loans can be a wise investment. And I know even though they don't go away, but if we're talking about student loans where you would borrow as much as what you anticipate for your first year's salary. So if you're a teacher, you expect to make about $50,000 right out the door at age 22 after you're done with college. So your student loan should, of course, be no more than $45,000 or $50,000. But again, that would be what you would call quote unquote good debt. And again, all debt you should avoid if possible, but there are acceptable debts. Maybe I should use the term acceptable as opposed to good. Okay, that's fine. But here's the problem with Donald Trump pushing for the lower interest rates. The problem is that you are continuing to lose more and more of your purchasing power on that dollar every single day. And for a lot of Americans, they get a little bit of rate of return on their savings account. Certainly, if you have a money market, a high yield savings account, a CD, money that would be in bonds, etc. So, if you look at interest rates, we want to make sure that you can at least hopefully keep up with the cost of inflation. If you go in a high yield savings account, and let's say that you get 4 or 5%. Okay, between 4 and 5%, I think the past few years you could find them out there um, for high yield savings account or CDs. And really, that was the only way that you would keep up with inflation. And I'm not going to talk about investing money in the stock market, which is good. Go buy an S&P 500. Again, this is for entertainment purposes only. I'm not a fiduciary. I'm not a financial advisor, of course, but if you want your money liquid, so to speak, go, a high yield savings account, a quick 6 month CD that you'll have access to that in a few months. Those might be a good way to have that money keep up with the inflation. So if you go get a $10,000 high yield savings account at 4% interest rate, theoretically you would keep up with inflation. However, when interest rates lower, inflation goes up, and your ability to keep up with that inflation has really dramatically decreased. And a lot of times, again, the stock market's a good idea. However, let's say if you have a short term goal, maybe you are saving up to buy a house and you need that money to be liquid within 6 months to maybe say 24 months. So half a year to 2 years, you're thinking of maybe putting a down payment on a house because, man, you're really going at it and you want to make sure that you save. And it's like, well, shoot, I can't get any return on the money that I'm saving. So inflation, the cost of housing, the cost of living, the cost of utility, the cost of property tax, wherever you're at, is going up much higher than your ability to save. The only thing that can really counteract that for most people is keeping that money in a CD or a high yield savings account when you do have that earmarked money saved for those big purchases. Now, again, with lower interest rates, seemingly, traditionally, they run inverse to inflation. Now you're going to pay higher inflation, and or you're going to get less money return on your money because interest rates are so low. So now you're feeling the effects of inflation much more, which is really a harmful thing. And Jerome Powell actually said, the economy is looking a little bit better. There are signs that inflation is cooling down. But again, if you think about how the cost of home prices. I mean, are you really seeing that? Go on Zillow and look at the average cost or the median price of a home in America. Even if you're in a state such as Iowa, which does not have extremely high home prices, because let's face it, Iowa is not a desirable state by any means. Okay, you're thinking about, well, shoot, I have to be making at least 100,000, 150,000 a year. If you traditionally go by what you can afford for a house, two and a times or two, I'm sorry, 2.5 times your household income. So again, if you're making $100,000 a year, you would anticipate that you should be able to, without being house poor, afford a home that is $250,000, and that's the actual um, listed price of the home. And again, the problem is everyone thinks about monthly payments. When you go in to buy a home, the realtor is going to talk about, well, how much can you afford? What's your monthly payment? When you go in to buy a car, the car salesman is going to smile at you and he's going to say, how much can you afford for a monthly payment? And they're not going to talk about that sticker price. They're not going to talk about the final price plus all the add-ons and warranties and everything. They're going to want to talk monthly payments, which again, I don't care about monthly payments. I have never cared about monthly payments and I will never care about monthly payments. I want to know, what is the cost of the thing, okay? What is the cost of the car? What is the cost of the house? So we can talk about interest rates all we want. We could talk about monthly payments all we want. But here's the thing, until we actually get the price of the thing we're buying down, interest rates aren't going to mean a hill of beans, okay? If you're overpaying on a house, who cares if the interest rate is lower, right? I would rather pay a 7% rate on a 30-year mortgage and get a good, fair price on a home than I would, overpay a home by, 25, 30, 40% and pay a much lower interest rate. And the other thing about this, too, and again, you can check with your bank or lender on this, but make sure that there is no penalty for prepayment because, shoot, that's what my wife and I did. We went and paid over principal payment only for every mortgage payment. So our mortgage was probably around 1,200 for many years, and then of course we would put an extra 100 a month, 150 a month. Cut out the Starbucks, cut out the DoorDash, whatever it is. I'm not saying you have to go full Dave Ramsey with the rice and beans thing, right? That's not what I'm saying here. But again, you can at least find expenses that you can cut out. It's not that difficult to do, right? You can find something. Do you need Netflix, Hulu and Disney Prime or ESPN or whatever it is, and the Criterion Channel, and then you have your Amazon Prime, and you have all these other streaming services. Can you stick to one, or can you get rid of a couple? Maybe just have Amazon Prime or something like that, and then you're good. So again, if you really sit down and attack it, there are ways that you can budget. Okay, but again, maybe a story for a different day because I want to kind of cut this video a little bit shorter here. And I know a short video for me is impossible because of course I like to talk a bit, but the thing we're really looking at is inflation is killing Americans. Americans are not getting rate of return on their money saved. You can never save yourself to prosperity when you have interest rates at 2 and 3%, right? So you have to do things like put it in the market, which you should do. However, that doesn't really address the issue of your short term goals. So you need higher interest rates to have options to put your money in for those 6 month to 2 years goals, right? Now, if you're looking outside the frame of 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, sure, go put some of that in the stock market, right? But if you're saving for a down payment on a house, which again, to my mind, that's the number one economical financial issue facing Americans is that we're becoming a society of renters, which believe me, a society of renters that is going to kill America financially, of course, and it really will. It truly will. We cannot have a society of renters. And yes, you say, well, again, lower interest rates, right? You can get that monthly payment down. Well, maybe, but again, if the home prices are so high, and I don't even want to get started on this whole thing about, well, someone has a house and they're locked in at 3% interest. If they were to sell their house, then they would have to go and buy a new house and then they would get 6% interest on that. So they stay in their home. Well, again, get your house paid off, pay down that debt, that sort of thing, because that's the other thing. Your interest rate, um, unless you get a variable interest rate, which is never a good idea, always go with a fixed interest rate. Again, you can always pay down on the principal of your balance that's owed, okay? Um, which in turn reduces how much of that house payment goes to interest. Here's a trick. Go look at your amortization schedule, right? So let's say you have a $1,500 house payment and you say like 300 of it goes to principal and then maybe 800 of it goes to interest, and then the rest of it goes to your what do they call that? Your he is it no I'm trying to even think of the term for it where they bundle it all in together, but the rest of it goes to property tax and the rest of it goes to your homeowner's insurance, okay? But go look at your amortization schedule, because each time that you pay a house payment, more and more of that money goes to your principal, and less of that money will go to paying the bank. And I can tell you that banker, they are probably driving a nicer car than you. They probably live in a nicer house than you do. So again, talk about lower interest rates, but who gives a hoot and holler when it's a lower interest rate on a higher amount? The thing is, our home prices are way, way too inflated in this country. We have priced people out. They're not building starter homes, and I've talked about this before. But again, I think lowering the interest rate, what that's going to do, it's going to really prevent you as a saver and you as an American from keeping up with the inflation, which, trust me, believe me, I'm not wrong. Inflation is the greatest theft of wealth, the greatest theft of your ability to get ahead in this world than anything else in this country. Inflation is a killer. Inflation has always been a killer. And again, if you're making $200,000, $300,000 a year or more, it's not going to matter to you because you can keep up with that because your income is so high. But if you look at someone who's making $35,000, $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year, inflation is a killer. We have to do something about this. So say what you will about Donald Trump. I get what he's doing. I understand why he's doing that, but he is misguided on that. And also keep in mind, Donald Trump comes from the real estate world where he is always looking at interest rates, he's always looking at borrowing money. And rich people have the ability to leverage debt more than you and I. We are the poor people here, right? We're the middle class. We're the peasants. We don't have the ability to leverage debt the way a lot of these people who want the lower interest rates do. Of course, they want to lower it. Of course, BlackRock wants to lower interest rates when they can go buy all these properties and make them all rentals and then charge more. Because again, you think if you're renting that you're not paying for, the higher cost of those properties, of course you're paying it through your increase of rent. So you have to be able to save, you have to be able to put some money away for a down payment, invest a portion in the stock market. You can invest all your money in the stock market, okay? Um, but you really need an ability to save that money, and to do that you have to have interest rates where you can at least on that single dollar at least keep pace with inflation or stay ahead of inflation, okay? So again, I'm not wrong about this, but what do you think? I am open to discussion. Are interest rates too low? Do you think they're too high? If it was me, I would have actually increased it a quarter point, gradually increase those interest rates a little bit up until we get maybe to 8% or so. We got to get the price of homes down. We got to start building small starter homes in this country. We got to cut the crap where we're building all these rental properties, right? We don't need people renting till they're age 40 or 45. If you talk about a way to destroy a nation economically, that is a very good way to destroy the economic solvency of a country, again, with a nation of renters. So what do you think? Again, certainly I don't think we should go up to the 16, 17% interest rate that we had in the 1980s. But we could talk till we're blue in the face about interest rates, but until we get the price, the listed price of property down, and until we can have property affordable for Americans to buy, to own a piece of ground, something that is solid, a roof over their head, we're going to keep going around in circles, and it's not going to do anyone any good. But I will tell you, if Americans cannot save for a down payment on a house and get a return on that money and keep up with inflation, we are in a world of hurt, right? So again, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to like this video, subscribe if you stuck through it. I see we're at 22 minutes right now on the timer. I went through this thing completely unedited, unscripted, because I don't know how to do anything else. So thank you for watching, and as always, you have a great, wonderful, and a beautiful day, and take care. Bye.